And here are the demands put forward by CPS. They seek a legal contract and say it isn't going to pay 11 billion rand at the end of March in absence of a deal. And the deal to be finalized in the next 2 days, as it will take 12 days for dispersal. It wants a hike in payment, citing an adjustment to inflation. CPS also wants a lump sum payment per month instead of per beneficiary payment. This means their payment remains the same even if the number of beneficiaries go down in the process of handover to another agency.
What they then go on to say is, as we commence the closing down of CPS, exactly in accordance with what they claimed about liquidation, our service levels will gradually approach those stipulated in the service level agreement due to the reallocation of CPS staff. And then they say this: we hope this return, in inverted commas, to standard service levels will not cause any major disturbance or create any unwarranted burdens for beneficiaries. So they're basically saying we're going to start tailoring down our services, and we hope, but don't assure or say, but rest assured beneficiaries are safe. They say we hope it won't cause major disturbances. Again, there is an implicit threat that rests within that sentence.
And joining us in studio is Tshepo Kgadima, political analyst. Mosiri Tsiane is with the South African Liberty Foundation as the chairperson there. And the lines are always open on 011-542-2186. Good evening, gentlemen, and thanks so much for joining us. I mean, is this a clear case of CPS, the service provider, holding essentially the employer to ransom with this crisis underway? We'll start with you, Mosiri.
Yes. Well, it's... You know, I would say that it's not a question of ransom as such, or holding the country at ransom. These are, one would say that for the past 20 years in our new democracy, we've never had a crisis. In actual fact, I'm amazed that there is a crisis. The president has indicated that there's no crisis. The minister has indicated there is no crisis. All that we are introduced in is to who's supposed to be the contract holder. As South Africans, we enter to know that this one is a better contractor or that one should have been a better contract. Something that really is not within our reach at this current moment. Those that are supposed to be like appointing, making sure that they've assessed those that have applied for this work. We are not part in knowledge of who they are or those people are, but in actual fact, we are invited into knowing who is going to be appointed and whether these terms are best suitable for us or not. But there's never been a crisis for the past 20 years. In actual fact, there's no South African who's not been paid even today. And there is no doubt that there would not be the beneficiaries that are not even paid come the 1st of April.
Yeah. But you'd appreciate that we do not have the luxury of time to wait until the 31st to ensure that all goes well. There is a legitimate reason why people are anxious. As you're saying, it's the first that we've had a threat to social grants not being paid out. But the scrutiny under which CPS is likely to go under in revealing their ledger, the expenditure and the profits that they're likely to make, the clause of non-benefit going forward is going to make the negotiations very difficult.
Well, I'm not sure that we can get to negotiations. I mean, what we saw today, there was very little explanation or information that was advanced in arguments by either SASSA Council or CPS Council. So effectively, we saw minimal information, maximum confusion by the justices that had to preside today in court. And that should really be very worrying, because if anything, we've got seemingly varying prayers, and I'm not so sure how the court is going to reconcile those varying prayers in line with the arguments that were advanced today by the various parties to this litigation. So that itself is very worrying. Are we in a crisis? If anyone is saying that we are not in a crisis, they are probably thinking that denial is just a river in Egypt. We are in a deep crisis. So people at home, ordinary citizens, they have got reason to be concerned, because to this date, there hasn't been anybody who has come forth with any practicable mechanisms on, should the court not direct that CPS continues in whatever form or shape with the payout of the social grants, what is the other alternative plan? And what is even more worrying for me, if any time there was to be so-called war room, as we saw during the electricity crisis and everything else, this was the time whereby the executive, and I'm talking about the president and all those interministerial, this is the time they should have been monitoring this situation by the hour. Because in terms of its catastrophic consequences, if it is not handled properly. And I cannot see how anyone can really say to this day that they can be handled properly. What is even more worrying is that we see the post office, which is an organ of state, with its post bank division, having come forth, and the advocate or senior counsel for the post bank and post office, he goes on record to say, actually, he himself consulted with the technical team at the post office. The question that now needs to be asked is, why was that technical team not consulting with the president, with the minister, Batabile Dlamini, together with their own minister, so that they could resolve this? They should have never gone to court in the first place, because today we saw that they could not be able to legally sustain the arguments that they were trying to advance. And what we are left with justices who really were exasperated. Is that an acceptable situation? I can say absolutely not.
Look, it would look like CPS at the moment are sitting in a favorable position, because having the infrastructure, technology, and having done this so well by their own account, saying that they've done a sterling job, and if anybody else can beat that, they're most welcome to challenge them. Essentially, they've laid out the terms of what needs to happen. Within the next 2 days, up to an 18-month contract needs to be signed. Otherwise, the system needs 12 days to activate to make sure that payments are made. They want a lump sum as opposed to the monthly payment per transaction. And they want, some level of guarantee that even when they tailor or factor out their services to either SASSA or another alternative service provider, that they have the benefit of making a profit. So for me, that is a stance that is already taken. It's this or nothing. You don't think that they're exploiting the crisis, at least, Mosirio?
Well, I would beg to differ with my colleague. There's no crisis here. In actual fact, this is the best legal minds we have in our country. And I can rest assured that they'll come up with a proper solution as to how this contract is going to flow. In actual fact, what we have here is that you're going to have a situation where the ConCourt, the Constitutional Court, is going to dictate or rather put in terms, these are the conditions in which this SASSA payments are going to be effected. This is what we find to be in the wrong. These are the questions that we think should be fixed. But there's no way that our Constitutional Court can wish that come the 1st of April, you have people that are not paid. There's no, that we're going to have. Now, the demands, or rather the conditions in that contracts, are going to be clearly outlined by the ConCourt. This we've seen in various cases where the Constitutional Court will put in details as to how the contract are going to be effected. So come the day that we are being presented with the judgment of the courts, we will be knowing how payment is going to be effected, we'll be knowing who is entitled to what percentage, we'll be knowing so forth. So that rest, one will say this contract, it lies in the hands of the Constitutional Court, which will in its entirety outline the terms and the condition thereafter. Yeah. We've seen even with the presidency in the Nkandla issue that the Constitutional Court had to come up with a process and a method of payment that says that you have to pay, Mr. President, 7 million out of the 200 and something million that is being alleged that you owe. So the terms were then determined by the Constitutional Court. Same will also happen here. So to say that there's a crisis, there is no crisis.
Yeah, but I mean the Constitutional Court also can't interfere in the executive decision, in the sense that the core function of the Social Development Agency, or rather SASSA, is to distribute or disperse grants. Why it was outsourced in the first place, taken from provinces, is a debate for another day. But at this point, CPS is certainly the one that is essentially cracking the whip as to what needs to happen. And if that does not happen, we're sitting with a catastrophe on the 31st of March.
I'm not so sure that they're actually having as much leverage as maybe it has been suggested. The CPS, I think, as it has been argued today, that they've got a constitutional obligation whereby, since they themselves, together with SASSA, have all along asserted that CPS is the only entity in this whole country that can be able to carry out these functions of paying out social grants. Therefore, they carry that constitutional obligation. And I was just very interested, by the way, when that was being argued, that there's another case, big case coming up now against Minister of Finance versus Oak Bay, FIC versus Oak Bay, that this very same issue, I'm sure the lawyers of Oak Bay are going to take it to heart and argue it very strongly and successfully so. But the issue being this, that as we stand here today, the elegant solution that the Constitutional Court can reach possibly can be on that of no benefit or no loss to CPS, and yet that they continue for a limited period of time. They have not been able to argue successfully, except that they dropped a bombshell that they now have got a lump sum that they demand that be paid to them over a period of a minimum of 12 months at least, regardless of how many beneficiaries are paid out. Now, how on earth SASSA saw it fit to agree to such terms and conditions, it is still beyond me. And more so, themselves, SASSA have only disputed the readiness of Postbank or Post Office to be able to take over these functions, when actually this, for me, seems to be the most feasible solution, which has got no litigious issues involved, that Postbank and South African Post Office, as their organs of state, they therefore would be able to contract or rather take over this function without the challenges of having to adhere to the provisions as in Public Finance Management Act. Now, why has that not been? It's not enough to just simply say that we do not believe Post Office is not ready. They should have at least had subject matter witness or expert witnesses before court today to be able to say the reason why we are asserting that CPS is the only entity, these are the reasons. Now, if the senior counsel for Post Office says he spent time with the technical team, they said within a month they can be able to take over this function, how come that has not been tested and how come that has not been verified? And I'm saying the executive and the government should have at least, and lastly, Cindy, I want to say this. When President Zuma came into office, he gave this nation a promissory note, and the promissory note was to this effect, that all ministers in his cabinet will be subjected to performance monitoring and evaluation. Now, that system, we would reasonably understand that was instituted in 2009, 2010. So the question that I think the presidency needs to answer today is that in the light of what we are now faced with, what is that performance monitoring and evaluation saying about the minister in concern? And I think citizens are well within their rights to now come and cash that promissory note with the hope that it will not bounce. Because what was led in court today paints a completely different picture about the performance of both SASSA as well as the minister. And that is something that we should not take lightly, and more so on the constitutional grounds that were argued by black sash lawyers. The court might really come to a very, very unfortunate finding against the minister, which will be damning, and can the minister afford that? So it's one thing to say, well, the minister, we've got confidence in the minister, but the court, based on the evidence that was led today, will most probably come up, will frown upon her abilities and her conduct.
Sure, Chief Justice referred to unethical leadership or a leadership vacuum within the department, and I think the general consensus, as you're saying, is on the incompetence or performance of the minister. But we have Advocate Zahir Omar, constitutional law expert, on the line. Good evening to you, and thank you for joining us. Court adjourned today, still very much with the society waiting with the bated breath as to what is going to happen and what decision the court may take. All of this would be to protect the constitutional right of the 17 million South Africans dependent on social grants. And CPS, would you say that are in a very favorable position and are flexing their muscles, Mr. Omar?
Hello, I did not hear you clearly. Can you repeat the question, please?
I was saying that CPS in this case, do you think they are capitalizing on this crisis with the hikes and all sorts of demands that they require?
Look, Albert Cockerell, who represented CPS, argued eloquently, and the terms and conditions which CPS are willing to undertake to effect the payments were spelled out by Advocate Cockerell today in court. These terms and conditions were the following. He said, one, there has to be a written contract concluded. There is nothing unreasonable in that. Secondly, he said that built into the contract, there must be provision for an increase in the fees to be paid to CPS, which fees must be in accordance with inflation. He did not insist that the contract endure for an undue period of time. He was frank and candid to the court. His submissions to the court on behalf of the CPS completely vindicates Minister Dlamini. Minister Dlamini knew in October 2016 that SASSA will not be able to pay out come 1st April 2017. Between October 2016 and February 2017, it's barely 3 months, bearing in mind that 2 months are a holiday period. The practical thing to do now is to ensure that the beneficiaries of these grants are paid on the 1st April. CPS is there. Minister Dlamini has informed the public and the country that CPS should do this enormously huge task. And the reasonable thing for the Constitutional Court to do, more specifically Chief Justice Mogoeng, rather than immerse himself in making utterances to demean and vilify our learned Minister Dlamini, I respectfully say he should, at this juncture, in the light of the urgency, agree that CPS do the payouts. The terms and the period of time and the amounts can be discussed, but a written conclusion of a contract is not unreasonable.
Would you agree, Tsepo, that legally speaking, the Constitutional Court doesn't have a leg to stand on? They essentially have to allow negotiations for an extended contract.
The Constitutional Court has been put in a very invidious position. The question is that necessary? And I say that no, it was not necessary at all. In fact, there are many parallels or case studies we can be able to draw from, and most I'd maybe like to reflect on one, which is in the United States, when the airline that is the only airline that has been profitable since inception in 1973, Southwest Airlines, they give a very interesting story which could apply here, that they had a 4-route schedule with 3 aircraft. And the then Director of Operations, as the story is eloquently told by former Chairman and CEO Herb Kelleher, is that Director of Operations made to all his staff, he said, listen, you will turn the aircraft in 15 minutes. And I think, Cindy, you would have an appreciation of that in terms of that industry. And they were all horrified. He said, 15 minutes if you turn the aircraft. If you can't turn the aircraft, I'm going to fire you and get somebody else who will turn the aircraft around in 15 minutes. If they can't turn it around, I'm going to fire them and get somebody else who can. That simply applies here. If the SASSA could not be able to do this within the required period of time, the people who were in charge there needed to be fired until we found somebody who could then be able to have the management skill and expertise to be able to do this mission critical, which is now become an emergency within the required period. And I'm saying that the assertions that have been made that CPS is the only one technologically that can do this is completely not true. The technology is ubiquitous, and there are many other people that can be able to, many service providers, but specifically the post office is the most viable option. We must bear in mind that CPS, as we stand here today, from just dispensing social grants, they make a profit of almost 800 million rand a year. That 800 million rand a year profit simply would then be a saving that go directly into the fiscus. How, therefore, can we still insist to dispense 800 million rand in the current economic conditions
but if the
when we have a viable option?
Yes,
being
but
the
Social Grants Agency
office
themselves had raised questions around the readiness of the post office to take the function over.
They have not had subject matter witnesses that today should have therefore been there to disprove or at least verify that. And they owed it. They owed it to the court to be able to assist the court. What we saw today was that the arguments that were being advanced, unfortunately, the justices that presided over there, they were left more confused than as all of us were confused in terms of what exactly is this very unique thing that says that only CPS, and when you deal with CPS, they come up now with a new condition, which before nobody knew about it until this afternoon. And that itself is a worry.
Mr. Omar, before we come to you, Mr. Omar, by virtue of the fact as to how we got here in the first place, that there wasn't an open tender process, and that even if CPS were to contest, they would have been the only ones there. The banks didn't get involved, the post office, etc., and we ended up with this contract being appointed by some wisdom unknown to us. Now, going forward, legally speaking, we're saying that the Constitutional Court has no other option but to approve the extension of the contract, or at least the negotiations thereof.
Now, Cindy, there's two issues I extract from your question. One is whether the Constitutional Court has the jurisdiction to seize itself with this matter. The second issue is what was the effect of the Constitutional Court declaring that the contract awarded to CPS was unlawful. Now let me begin with the second one. The term used here is structural interdict. I say with respect, the Constitutional Court was wrong and misdirected itself. The Constitutional Court could not simply declare the award of the contract to the CPS to be unlawful and leave things hanging. The Constitutional Court had it properly implemented the structural interdict. The Constitutional Court would have ordered the minister to at least once every 3 months present a progress report to the court so that the court could monitor the structural interdict. The court, with respect, the Constitutional Court did not, in fact, do that which the law prescribes when handing down an order, which is a structural interdict. As far as the jurisdiction of the Constitutional Court is concerned, we can't have our country being governed by the Constitutional Court. That is bizarre. The Constitutional Court and the Office of the Public Protector owe their creation to our Constitution. Section 182(1) imposes the duty upon the Public Protector to monitor and look after contracts concluded between members of the public and the state. If there is any wrongdoing, it is the Office of the Public Protector who must monitor and make a pronouncement and make recommendations. These recommendations we know now is binding. So I respectfully say that the Constitutional Court should do the practical thing and be guided by Learned Minister Dlamini, who says that right now CPS must be awarded some or other contract. We can't complain about the fees with respect. We're looking at 17 million beneficiaries. It's a mammoth, enormous task. In fact, the fees alone, if you were calculated on 50 rand per person, 50 rand is very low. It exceeds 800 million rand. So with the greatest respect, what Minister Dlamini has proposed to be done to sort this crisis out is what should be implemented by the court.
All right, let's just get a reaction, Masiri. Just from the Liberty Foundation, you'd be interested primarily in constitutional issues that impact the most vulnerable and protecting the rights of South Africans. The commercial person has no obligation, really, when it comes to CPS as a service provider, to be benevolently negotiating rates and run their company into a loss. So legally speaking, they have the right to say, look, we want a lump sum, or these are the terms that we're willing to engage on or to concede on. So why is it then that when the Constitutional Court said that the CPS contract in the first place was invalid, that we didn't see a concerted effort being made to address the issues of the department not being capable in themselves to deliver the social grants? Do you think that it was a deliberate attempt to ensure that we sit in this crisis today?
Well, I think we've heard it from the minister herself that there was also an opening that was given to SASSA and say, SASSA, go and look for other role players or rather for other contractors that can come in. And, among others, the minister indicated that there were 3 of them, but they could not, when they assessed all these 3, none of them could have been better than CPS. This is the best that we have now. Coming into the play We have also the Postnet or the Post Bank itself. It says it's got about 6 million clientele that it can service. In actual fact, what CPS is actually proposing is far much better than what the Post Bank and the Post Office can offer today. To even imagine that the Post Bank is a better option now, surely it will be unimaginary. Looking at the 5 kilometer radius that they've put there, and it says people should not rather walk or travel 5 kilometers for them to get that payment. Now CPS is able to get hold of them at a very closer range. Now, back to the question that you've asked about whether this is just the simplest of all tasks that is worth that much. Of course, it's servicing 17 million people is not an easy task. It should come with many logistics, which are expensive in their own nature. And to have asked for such an increment, surely they've calculated it and they've given, I think they've negotiated or rather given the department and said, with these much figures, this is what we're capable of achieving. But with this little, this is how much we will not be able to deliver. The interest we should be having, more than any other thing, because I think we're losing a point here. We're interested in contractual obligations and contracts of who's supposed to get this contract. The most key factor that SALF will be interested is whether on the 1st of April will our people, 17 million of our people, get the payment. Once we get that assurance, we can go to sleep peacefully and we can therefore look at other means differently later on. But for now, key for South Africans...
But I think the point is this is a 5-year contract that we're talking about that's ought to conclude naturally at the end of the month. And where does the renegotiation of an increased hike and a lump sum come in if there hasn't been adequate negotiation on a new contract? It's already a prescription that CPS is giving on an invalid contract and one that will come to end anyway.
Let's bear this in mind. It is Black Sash that approached the court. The SASSA withdrew from the process that initially they had wanted to embark on, that is of approaching the court to ask the court to do that which was a mission impossible, to extend an invalid contract that the court had declared. So one can understand why they withdrew that course of action from day one. However, now, when they go back to the same court, based on Black Sash's application that then was supported by Freedom Under Law, we then finding out that they were actually trying to get Treasury to agree to exempting SASSA from having to go into a competitive process as required in law. And that's where now we find out about this contract that seemingly or was agreed to in principle, but that has remained secret up till this afternoon. Nobody knows what is the content of that. But I just want to reflect on this, Cindy. There is absolutely no way. CPS, as was argued in court today, subcontracts other service providers. They subcontract Green Road Bank, who then one would believe that they have a database, they've got a historical account who they have been paying on behalf of CPS on a monthly basis. So that database, as long as that database is secured as an intact, therefore there should be no difficulty in being able to have that being taken over by SASSA. Secondly, we found that Fidelity Security Service are the ones that have been ensuring that where they have to pay out cash, they are providing that service. CPS does not own Fidelity. Therefore, Fidelity could reasonably have been able to move over and give exactly the same service at the same cost to SASSA, or at least to the post office, whereby post office could have subcontracted until the transitionary period where they can be able to take on this contract. So absolutely there's no merit of any kind whatsoever on why they are arguing that CPS is the only one that must have a birthright to do this contract, because all that infrastructure they do not own, they subcontract it, and that infrastructure is still available to either the post office, which is an organ of state, or even to SASSA itself, which is the rightful agency in law that's supposed to be paying this. Why have they not considered that? They have not explained to anybody, and that's the difficulty that some of us have. Yeah. Why have they not considered these options, which to me, they seem like they are viable options that seemingly can be done. But the database issue has not been resolved. Who actually owns that database? Why is it so difficult for SASSA to know exactly of the 9,000 plus points that CPS is using to pay those pension payouts? Why is that not available to SASSA or to post office? Therefore, post office could seemingly, within that month period that they say they can, there should be no difficulty for them to take over, except that then we would have a legitimate expectation for a cost saving of 800 million rand a year.
Yeah.
And that is a big factor we need to consider.
Correct. Over and above that, just recently the Constitutional Court had ruled that the unlawful deductions of funeral policies and cell phone and, so that you not have the ability to transact on your SASSA card only came recently. But over the years, social grant beneficiaries had been taken money off their accounts illegally with CPS still having the contract. So that in itself, I didn't hear of a refund to the beneficiaries. There's no talk of what penalty CPS is going to suffer. We seem to be treating this company with kid gloves, and Asepo says there's many other players in the value chain. Why the dependency so much on CPS?
Where are these other role players? That's a question we should be asking. Where are they now? The only person who has, or rather the company that has come in the front for now, in actual fact, is Postbank with 6 million clientele. Nobody else is coming to the front and say, not even the banks are coming in the forth and say, we're capable of doing 1, 2, 3. Which other company? You see, it's easy to imagine a solution of the mammoth task that we have currently. And that mammoth, it seems that we are easy to always critique and think we can think better than those that are in those positions, and in their shoes, we can get better and do much better than what they have done. There's no way in which I do not have doubt, or I do not have doubt with the credibility and that the minister has. This they have not taken lightly. The fact that for the past,
You're saying Minister Dlamini?
Mr. Dlamini, yes. For the past 20 years, nowhere have we ever had this crisis. And in actual fact, we're anticipating a crisis which is not there. The ministers come in the forth and said, we will pay. If there are better candidates out there, where are they? These are imaginary candidates that we can think they could have come into the play. They would have taken this at far more cheaper. Anyone else, the reason why they would have withdrawn or would not want to participate in that is because they could see the enormous tax that there is, and that this is not a cheap account that you can handle. In actual fact, they are actually running away from the fact that saving 17 million is not easy.
Okay, Mr. Just last word from Tsepo here. You are absolutely convinced, or at least as being a prisoner of hope, that grants will be paid out and the CPS contract, because our hands are bound essentially, will have to be extended.
If you secure the database, the technology is there, there should be absolutely no reason. Should be able to seamlessly move over. If you have an inconvenience of people over 2 or 3 days, it's not going to be the end of the world, but it's going to create financial hardship if you go and you now give a 12 or 24-month contract, as has been demanded, at a higher price that was argued in court today, which we had for the first time. That certainly, I cannot see how any reasonable thinking person can go and demand that. It's a very tragic situation we sit in. The issue is very simple. The ministry, or rather SASSA, they were created specifically to be able to pay out social grants. Why have they not done that, and why has nobody been fired for failing to establish a system that can do that? That again is a question. Why has the minister not seen it fit to go and fire those that were incapable? Because it therefore means...
Well, there was a leadership crisis as well.
The judge president was horrified to say, what you're arguing to Advocate Breitenbach, to say what you're arguing is that SASSA is so incompetent. If they are so incompetent, if they created for that function, why then do we have such an agency? Why has the minister not taken action? Why only go in the 11th hour, 59 minutes to the time, and say, actually the CEO that I have defies my instruction, and that's why we are in this crisis. No matter whichever way that we put it, we have a problem on our hands. But if they secure the database, why is it so difficult for them to secure the database so that they can be able to give this function to an organ of state or themselves to take it, and then use the subcontractors that are there? And the people that currently work for CPS would happily move over because they also want job security. They will be happy to be employed tomorrow in another capacity as SASSA employees instead of CPS employees.
Masiri seems to believe that if you look at the tenure of Minister Bathabile Dlamini over the past 20 years, this is the only blemish really that it tarnishes her reputation. Overall, she's achieved well.
She's been there 7 years.
Yeah, the 7 years done well. Not even a single month. We're not even talking about the past month. Once you start saying there's a crisis, tell us that nobody was paid last month. Tell us that nobody is not paid on the 1st of April. People are paid. Why is the crisis?
Okay, we're going to leave.